Hi, my name is Antoine and I'm a shamanic healer and ceremonialist. And today I wanted to make a brief video about deities, archetypes and spirit allies. So in shamanic practice and animistic practice, all the work that is done with a relationship with other beings. So whether you're doing healing, whether you're restoring some form of balance in your community, whether you are restoring balance with nature, whether you are working with the ancestors, whether you're working for the dead, whether you are doing some form of cleansing, whether you are retrieving some information for the growth and well-being of people or for yourself, you are working in relationship with other beings in the spirit world, if you want to use that word that is kind of modern world, translating different concepts and experiences actually of the invisible world, including in ancient European cultures. So they all had names and very defined experiences and maps for the spirit worlds. So you are working with those beings. Some of those beings, if we really come back, for example, to shamanic initiation or shamanic practice, are called spirit allies, another modern world, and we're trying to translate something here. And there's a huge variety of spirit allies, or you could say the shamans' spirits, or the animistic healers' spirits, or in some cases, for example, the magicians or the witches' spirits. We are here talking about a huge variety. Some of them could be, they're all, you could say, non-physical consciousnesses. Some could be animals or beings that come in the shape of animals. I don't have a definite answer on this. I think there are really both. I'd have to elaborate on this, but some of them are spirits of deceased people, but elevated or wise people. So people who have gone through the process of death in a very adequate way and have gained great wisdom in their life, or a certain level of wisdom or knowledge in their life, and also in the process of death. Some people will say, well, some people work with the dead who are not elevated. That is true. You have to know how to do this. Many people don't do this in shamanic traditions. There are a few exceptions, and there are definitely certain traditions that do work with the dead in order to gain information and work. Many magical traditions around the world, and some animistic traditions. You could say Paloma Yombe, for example, in Cuba, works with the dead in a reciprocal relationship of elevating the dead, and the dead also bringing something to the living, including in the realm of healing. It's a tricky work. You could find the same thing also in Thailand. It's tricky work. You have to know exactly how to do it. The traditions are very well established, and of course the risks are important. And it's not really here what we're talking about in shamanism, but this is to say that you could work in a way with the dead and non-elevated dead also. I don't recommend it, of course, unless you are under tuition in one of those traditions. It's very tricky. Then some of the spirits of the shaman or shamanic person are people who will come along the way. So you can accumulate a certain number of spirits, and you will have spirits from sometimes traditions, various traditions sometimes around the world that can happen, and I think it tends to happen more and more. I was talking about appropriation, and people might say, well, this is appropriation. For me, if a spirit, and actually in deity, comes in an authentic way for you, you treat it and you approach it with respect, and it does not belong to your ancestral traditions or even background, for example, if you are spirit taught, I don't think at all it is a problem, as long as you are in a position of learning. You strive to learn, and usually they will do that, your spirits, in that sense, to learn about those traditions. They will keep teaching you about those traditions, and if that is an alive tradition, you don't claim to belong to that tradition or have been initiated by shamans from that tradition, for example. But even if you haven't, I don't think you should throw away extremely strong relationships with spirits related to those traditions or related to more ancient strands of those traditions. I hope this makes sense. Let me know if this needs to be clarified even more. So you have human teachers, dead, you could say, or in non-corporeal form, elevated ones. You could have, again, animal spirits, and you could have all kinds of other spirits and being non-human ones, many of them, related to different elements, related to different expressions of nature. Some of those beings, that relationship may have been developed, like for example water spirits, both in trance and through very dedicated practice and contacts in nature. So certainly in modified or altered states of consciousness, but not of the same kind. Through also ritual, through sitting, as I've mentioned, through being in sacred space with them and sharing. You might have ancestor spirit guides, so related to your genetic ancestors, etc., etc. Now you enter into the realm of gods or goddesses, if you want to call them that. And I mentioned elements, that you could have spirits related to elements that are not really gods and goddesses. And you could have those beings, large beings, that are related to forces in nature, but are very big beings. And you could call them gods and goddesses. Many of them will come in the shape of gods and goddesses from current traditions. So they have different masks or faces, and they'll come in those faces. Or sometimes, for some practitioners, in the mask of ancient gods and goddesses. You have to exercise a lot of discrimination and also a lot of perseverance and patience, and not start claiming, and more really important, not illusioning, going into an illusion that through one contact that god or goddess is working with you, so-called. Those contacts, if authentic, are certainly profound and meaningful. Now, working with gods or goddesses, that is a completely different thing. I don't even know if you can work with gods or goddesses. You can certainly have a relationship with them and ask for their help at certain times within your own healing journey and healing or work for others. That is done through a lot of practice, because this practice will help you clarify all those illusions and attachments and identifications really that you can develop through the contacts with them, because they are huge energies. And even after years of practices, those are not your gods and goddesses in my experience. They are just forces of nature so large that your consciousness needs filters in order to process the contact with them. So you could say there are currents of energy, very deep ones, and that constitute some part of the fabric of the universe. And this is why you have goddesses also of water, of the oceans, of fire, gods of fire, of certain planes of consciousness related to the death, for example, realms, related to different aspects of consciousness, profound ones. You could say even those immense archetypal figures that are the great mother and great father, and in their many faces and many aspects. Some of them, you could say, profoundly benevolent, and some of them very difficult for us to apprehend, or some of them destructive. So they're faces of the same thing. And this is where this relates to archetypes, because I said those great archetypes like the father and mother. Really, the term archetype, I don't think it was, I can't remember who developed that term, but some researcher before Jung, but certainly Jung, the great psychotherapist and really shamanic person in my opinion, really developed that kind of term. And I think there's a misunderstanding about what they are in modern psychotherapy. I'll come back with a second part on this video.